If you don't know me, my name is Rachel, and I'm going to bring you the message this evening. And as I've been reflecting on the Christmas story, something has stood out to me, and it is that, did you know that God has made you a promise? Right? God, the God of the universe, who created the universe, he has made you a promise. And not only has he made you a promise, but he's made a plan that fulfills that promise. Right? He's made a plan that fulfills that promise. And the reason why Christmas is so exciting at Christmas time, the reason why we get so excited at Christmas time is because this is when we see the promise and the plan of God being played out in front of our eyes. Like when you think of God's people, they had heard about his promise, they had heard about his plan, but they hadn't actually seen it being played out. And so when Jesus was born, it was the beginning of it being played out in front of them. And so God has made a promise to you. He has made a plan. And today we're going to talk about how that plan is being played out. And the series that we've been looking at leading up to the Christmas story is called What Child Is This? And thank you to the story of the three wise men that we just heard. There were three gifts that were brought to baby Jesus. And as we reflect on the story tonight, I want you to think of each of those gifts as a promise, as a mini promise, a gift that was given to baby Jesus that actually showed he was so much more than just a man. And so when we talk about how the wise men gave the gift of gold, it was actually a promise that baby Jesus would grow up to be more than a man, but he would also grow up to be a king. And when he was given the gift of frankincense, it was a promise that baby Jesus would grow up to be more than a man, but that he was actually also God. And the gift of myrrh, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, is that when he got the gift of myrrh, it was a promise that baby Jesus was going to grow up to be more than a man, but he was actually also going to be a sacrifice. And so if you're not sure about what myrrh is, I don't really know exactly what it was before I prepared this sermon, but it is actually a fragrant, a sense, an aroma. And it comes from the sap of a tree found in the Near East. But interestingly, this fragrance was used in animal sacrifice, and it was also used to prepare bodies before they were buried. And so I want to explore with you guys a little bit today about what the plan and promise of God looked like. And to make it easy, I've broke it down into 3 dot points. And the first dot point is all about God's design. And I've got a little leaf there because I think when we live in God's design, we experience life. Right? When we live in God's design, we experience life. And in Genesis chapter 1-3, we get a picture about how God designed us to be in a close relationship with him. There's certain parts that talk about how God left heaven and came down to earth to walk alongside Adam and Eve. He came to just walk alongside them and to be with them. And there's another part that talks about there was no shame. There was nothing in between them. It was just God and his people, and they were close together. The other thing that Genesis talks about in this original design is that God is the provider of all the needs. It talks about how the streams water the trees. There was no need for rain, but actually those streams provided all the nourishment that the plants needed. It also talked about how the trees in the garden gave all the food that they needed. They didn't need to go to search and to hunt or go to the supermarket to get their food, but it was actually all there. God was close with them, and he was the provider of their needs. And the other thing about this perfect design is that God created this perfect relationship with us, but he gave us something really powerful. He gave us a choice. Right? God gave us a choice. And in Genesis, this choice, what it is represented is the tree of life. And you might also know it as the apple tree that, one gender ate an apple and gave it to the other gender. We won't go into, who started it, but, that happened. But the important thing was that there was a choice. There was a choice that was made. And this leads us to our second dot point, is that Adam and Eve in that moment actually stepped out of God's design and they into brokenness. And, I think for each of us, as we reflect on our own lives, I wonder if we can see that same choice to actually step out of God's perfect design and to step into brokenness, to choose something that is actually not of God. You see, when God designed us and he gave us choice, he basically said, I want to be with you, but do you want to be with me? Right? He said, I want to be with you, but do you want to be with me? And for all of us, at some moment in our life, we have chosen to step away from God. Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned, for everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. I don't think we notice it, and I wonder if Adam and Eve noticed it. But when we actually step out of God's design and step into brokenness, we are actually stepping away from God, right? We are actually moving away from God. And God made this promise to be close to us. And even though we chose to step away, he said, this isn't what I want. And so he actually made a plan. And that brings us to our next point of rescue. Oh, that slide doesn't match. Am I in the right spot? Sorry, give me a moment. I want to talk about the brokenness, okay? And I want to talk about the plan of rescue. And I'm going to talk about two plans. Do you guys all know what a Bible looks like? Yeah, this is not a Bible, okay? This is not a Bible, but I forgot to bring mine. But in the Bible, it's broken up into two sections. We've got the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Old Testament is all before the Christmas story, essentially. So anything before Jesus was born is the Old Testament, and then anything after Jesus was born is the Old Testament. And you see, God made a plan for the Old Testament, and then he had to make a new plan. And so what I want to talk to you about a little bit is what the plan in the Old Testament was. You see, when we stepped into brokenness, this is what I was going to say. I remember now, okay? When we step into brokenness, we might not realize it. But if God's design brings us life, then brokenness brings us death, right? If God's life brings us life, then brokenness brings us death. And you see, God didn't want us to experience that death. He didn't want us to be separated from him. And so he made a plan, he made his Old Testament plan, and that was that death. Rather than us experiencing that death, this animal would experience this death. And we talked about myrrh at the beginning, and this spice was actually used to anoint the animal and the priest and the altar. And you can see that this is all part of the promise, that this is like the first part of the promise that God was going to make a plan. And in the Old Testament, an animal was sacrificed to bring people back into relationship with God. Rather than us, the human, wearing the weight of sin, this animal took this weight and sin for us. And so once the animal was sacrificed, we went back into God's design. But I think God saw that, and he saw the work and he saw the arduousness, and he probably saw the animal. I don't know about you guys, but I think these days we're very animal friendly, right? We're thinking that poor cow, like I'm doing the thing. Why does the cow need to die? And so God actually made a new plan. But the thing about it is that this was the final plan. Right? He made a new plan, and it was the final plan. And that is when he sent his son Jesus to come as a sacrifice. He sent his son Jesus to come as a sacrifice to make things right, so that he could fulfill his promise, so that he could be in a relationship with us. Isn't that a gracious God? A God who wanted to be with us, and then we stepped away from him, but yet he still said, I'm going to keep my promise. I'm going to keep my promise to you, and I'm going to send my son to bear that weight so that you can be close with me again. And so what I want to do for the second part of the message is I want us to hear about God's plan and about his promise, but I want us to hear it in a story form. And so I'm just going to read a story that I've wrote for you guys tonight. And so in the first service, some people closed their eyes, some people looked at me. Whatever helps you listen and engage, I don't mind. If you want to fall asleep, I won't take any. I won't judge you for it either. It's not a bedtime story. No. All right, so here we go. This is God's story. This is God's promise to you. It says, "My child, I remember when you were mine. In the beginning, I held you in my arms. I would throw you high in the air, and I would always catch you. I promised that I would protect you. I would keep you safe. I would hold you. I would provide for you. I would always love you. I promised we would be close. I made a special place that we could be together. In the beginning, it was beautiful. One day in the far distance, you noticed a flicker of light, and it intrigued you. You were curious and you asked me about it. I've always been a father that has encouraged your sense of curiosity, and I wanted you to be able to choose the places you would go and not demand that you stay near. However, in this moment, I felt a deep sadness in my heart as I saw your eyes being fooled by this flame. I responded to you with the truth. I said, son, I know from here it looks like this flame promises light, love, fun, adventure, lust, excitement, fullness. But these promises are empty, and there is great danger as you draw closer to that flame. I looked into your eyes and said, you are my son, and I love you no matter where you travel. But I hope that you will stay with me. I will not force you, though it is your choice. I could tell by the way you were looking back at me that the seduction of the flame was far too enticing. You responded, Father, I want to go explore. I want to find that flame. And so I watched as you walked away. I called out to you, please come back. Please come back over and over again. And as your silhouette dropped beyond the horizon, I called out one more time with a desperation I've never felt before. Please, son, come back. I realized in that moment that even though I was calling out as loud as I could, that you could no longer hear me. I dropped down onto my knees and I started to weep. I don't know how long it was until I got back up. I wondered if you would turn around. I wondered if you would ever want to return. I grieved for the son who I had lost and who may never come back. That is the cost of letting your child choose. I realized that I couldn't continue to live like this, that I needed to make a plan. I needed to at least try to get you back. And so I went to find your big brother, Jacob, and let him know that you had left. I told him that I missed you and that I was worried that you would not survive the journey. He said, don't worry, Father, I will go to save my brother. You had been gone for a while, and so he grabbed out his bike and his helmet and his water bottle, and he set off after you. At the beginning of your journey, you were excited. Your newfound freedom filled you with energy and desire. You dreamt about the time that you would find the flame and that perhaps you would feel like then you had arrived. As you continued and drew closer to the flame, you started to feel weary. You started to feel hot. You started to feel lost. It was as if the flame never got any closer. It was always in the distance. And you started to wonder, were the words of my father true? You started to grow so weary that you needed to get down on your hands and your knees and crawl. You looked back in the direction of your father's house, my home, but it was too far. You knew you would never make it back on your own. And so you continued to crawl into the flame that you now knew as emptiness. This light, this flame had promised so much, but now that you see that they were just empty promises. You felt so sad, a sadness that you never had experienced before, one that weighed you down and pulled you onto the floor. You rolled over onto your back and you called out, "I never should have left." And as you sat in the lonely, dark silence, you started to hear a voice. Brother, I have come to find you, to rescue you. Our Father wants you home." As you looked up, you saw your brother riding towards you on his bike. And in that moment, you were filled with a spark of life. You were not alone. Your brother had come to save you. As he drew closer, you realized that he too was exhausted, battered and bruised. He looked as if he'd ran a marathon to find you, to chase you, to rescue you, and to bring you home. Emotion overwhelmed you and the tears rolled freely from your eyes. Your brother jumped off his bike and he said, "Here you go. Here is my bike. Here is my helmet. Here is my water." And you were so excited and relieved to see him. But as you clipped up the strap on your helmet, you started to worry, what would my father say when I returned? And you flinched at the thought. Your brother read your mind and said, "Don't worry, he'll be excited to see you." So you jumped on the bike and got ready to go. And then suddenly you realized there was only one bike. There was only one water. There was only one helmet. There was no way you could both make it home. You were both so dehydrated and exhausted, and the journey home was just too long to make it back on foot without water. The flame had literally sucked the life out of you. You said to your brother, "No, I can't go. I cannot leave you." He replied, "This is why I came. I came to rescue you. Your Father has promised to keep you safe. Your Father has promised that you can come home. This was our plan. We knew there would be a sacrifice. But we both loved you so much, and we are promise keepers. Go home to our Father. He is not an empty promise. He will fill your cup." You looked to the flame and you saw it for what it truly was, an empty promise. You turned away. You looked to your brother and you saw the love in his eyes, and all you could manage was a whispered thank you. And you looked back to your Father's house and began the journey into his arms. I wonder in that story if you heard of the design and of the love and of the relationship that God wants with you. That he created you, that he loves you, that he wants to provide for you. He wants to fill your cup. I wonder, as you heard the story, if you could relate to being fooled by the flame. I wonder if you've been fooled by a flame. Something that you think might offer you hope and love and life. But you're just realizing, I'm still empty. I'm still empty. There is still a brokenness, a darkness that is inside of me. I wonder if you heard the hope of a plan to rescue you, to restore you, to bring you back into a relationship with a God who lives in heaven that loves you so dearly. You see, there is one different thing about the story that we just heard to the plan and the promise of Jesus. And that is that the brother in the story didn't make it. He didn't make it back. But in the story of Jesus, He was a sacrifice. He did give his life, but he actually rose again. He came back to life. In Romans 8:11, it says this. It says, when God lives and breathes in you, and he does, surely as he did in Jesus, you are delivered from that dead life. With his spirit living in you, your body will be alive in Christ.